Hi, I'm Olivia.
And I'm Amy.
And this is a Girls in Marketing podcast. Every week, we release a new episode that you won't want to miss. Our guests are industry experts with amazing experiences, so you'll always come away with new nuggets of wisdom. From educational and inspiring episodes covering the latest in digital marketing to casual and fun chats with the Girls in Marketing team, unpacking marketing myths and trends, we've got it all.
Here at Girls in Marketing, we're all about empowering and supporting women to be the best marketers they can be through our online learning platform and community. Check out our resources and membership to get involved, as we'd love to welcome you to our inner circle.
Right, let's dive into an episode together.
Hi, I'm Amy, Head of Marketing at Girls in Marketing. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Girls in Marketing podcast. Today, I'm joined by the amazing Alex Hickson, who's Head of Digital PR at TrunkBBI, founder of Flamin' Crap, and also has his own podcast. Today, we get to pick his digital PR brain and also get an insight into experience managing a team and starting his own e-commerce business. There's a lot to unpack in this episode, so I can't wait to dive in. Welcome to the episode, Alex. It's so lovely to have you with us today.
Thanks.
So before we get started, I thought it'd be really great to just dive in a little bit about your career journey and how you've got to where you are now in your career.
Yeah, definitely. So I have probably been working in PR now for about 5 years. But originally, when I was at uni, I studied politics. And for ages thought it was politics that I wanted to go into. And I looked at like jobs in like political comms and stuff like that. But really quickly was like, actually, I really feel like this is just not the right path for me.
Oh, really?
So I ended up leaving uni and working in recruitment for a year, which was hands down the worst job I think I've ever had in my entire life. But I think working kind of with businesses in that kind of way, I quickly realised, actually, I really enjoy kind of like getting under the skin of a brand and like really trying to help them. So I ended up kind of helping them more with like branding than actual like recruitment issues.
Yeah.
So in the end, I ended up going back and doing a master's in corporate comms, marketing and PR. And then ended up working in like festival PR for a little bit. And then at an agency that did like fintech, and then kind of stumbled my way into digital PR eventually about 4 years ago.
That's so interesting. I love hearing the stories behind how people get to where they are, because I think it happens a lot with everyone in our marketing community that I speak to. I think a lot of people that we speak to who are really new in starting out in their careers, or say, you know, they're just going to university or just graduating university, they have it in their head that it's like you've got to go straight into what you're going to do forever, or find your passion straight out the gate after university. And it's just not really how it works.
No.
And that's so interesting to hear that you've gone down a lot of different routes. I mean, I was the same as you. I studied languages at uni and then was like, actually, I don't want to do this now.
Yeah.
So I totally relate to that.
It's always really late in the day as well. It was like about to graduate. I was like, I don't really want to do this now. I'm going to have to figure it out.
I was literally the same. I was like, okay, what do I want to do with languages? Don't want to go into translation. And then I was like, I'll be a teacher. Got into a teaching course, went to one lecture, and then was like, don't want to be a teacher. So it was just like a lot of changes in a very short space of time. But yeah, it's really interesting that obviously now you found your space in digital PR. What would you say it is that you love most about it? What's kept you here?
I think, one, the creativity of it, and also in the grand scheme of things, I think from when I think back to when I first started my exec job like 4 or 5 years ago, the industry is like in ways unrecognizable. Like it's changed so much and it continues to change and adapt. And I think obviously the world of digital is changing so much anyway, just because of the nature of it. But I think digital PR as a discipline, if you will, is so much different to 4 years ago when I first started working. And it was so much more different then to it was when people first started like link building back in the day. That it feels like now, and when you sort of look ahead to like the next couple of years, I feel like our roles and our sort of positions in our roles will change anyway, and it'll change again. And it's kind of taking more parts of traditional PR and it's involving more things to do with social and search and all stuff like that. So it kind of feels like it's one discipline that it's been really fun to kind of become an expert in, but I literally learn new stuff every day. And there's always a new way of trying things or a new way of doing it, which keeps the job feeling really fresh, I think.
Yeah. And I think definitely if you're the type of person who gets bored easily or just kind of needs new challenges all the time, it's definitely a good type of career to be in, isn't it? Because like you say, there's never really a time when you can just kind of sit back on your laurels and go, okay, I know everything there is to know about digital PR now and I'm an expert in everything, and like I'll just take a day off. It just doesn't happen. I see you talking on LinkedIn quite a lot about breaking out of your brand bubble. I think it's a really interesting kind of thing that you talk about. It'd be really good if you could expand a little bit about that and what that means to you.
Yeah, so I think it kind of came about from, I had worked in like exclusively, I guess, digital marketing agencies, digital PR agencies for the first couple of years of my career. And then I moved into an agency which was more of a creative brand agency. I guess you consider them more traditional. They were working with amazing brand names, like massive clients like Tinder, for example, like names you'd all recognize. And I thought, oh, this is going to be an amazing opportunity to kind of expand my skill set really and work with some of these big brands on these huge branding projects. But what was so interesting is that there's so many brands and so many businesses, sort of big and small, that I think can often exist too much in like an echo chamber of their brand. I think when you look at some established businesses and companies, especially if you're agency side and you're working with them, they have such a strong idea about their brand identity and what is on brand for them. And I think that like anyone that works in an agency will know, and that doesn't feel very on brand, and it's not necessarily like good granular feedback. It's like, well, what is on brand? Like, and I think when you start to think about the way that search works and digital PR and brands that say have a business goal or a brand goal to target new audiences or, you know, drive more traffic to a specific category page on the website or to increase sales of a certain product, I think too often the branding team internally and the SEO or the digital marketing teams don't tend to work together, or they're very separate departments, or they're siloed. That's not the case, obviously, across the board. Like there are some that work amazingly well together, but just from my experience, there's a lot that don't seem to have that connection. And I think what happens there is that brands are missing out on doing some really creative work with kind of search at the heart of it and SEO at the heart of it that also can ladder up to their brand goals. So basically, there's been so many instances where I've been really trying to push brands to kind of break out of that brand bubble and say, okay, it might not necessarily feel like it absolutely aligns to these core values that you've set out, but ultimately, what do your customers want? They're not searching for your brand story. They're not searching for this kind of brand identity that we think we have. They're searching for an answer to their problems. They're searching for a product that's going to help them. They're searching for a service that's going to make their life easier. And that isn't always going to come about by sticking to these like really rigid brand values. If that makes sense.
I 100% get that. And I think that makes complete sense, because it's like obviously brand, particularly like you say with like long-standing brands who are household names and things like that, their brand is such an important part of why they're now so successful, and you know, the fact that people know them. But is sticking too much to that and relying and falling back too much on, you know, we are a household name and people know us for XYZ, is that inhibiting them from actually reaching the people who maybe aren't interested in the brand name and they just want you to solve a problem? Like, are they actually causing themselves more problems, and like actually people are going elsewhere because they're thinking, okay, yeah, great, you're XYZ brand and you're fantastic, but you know, when I search for something or whatever, I can't find that you do it, but this person can, and I'm happy to go with them because I'm not bothered about the brand. Like, do you feel like it's easier then for, you know, when you kind of maybe work with brands with less of an established brand name to get them to do those sorts of things and be more on board?
Yeah, definitely. I think it kind of comes with the nature of whether they're like a startup or like a challenger brand, or just their brand name doesn't hold as much equity. I think it's easier because they want to be up there with, you know, the leaders in their space or the leaders in their industry, and therefore they're more likely to take risks. Obviously, some startup brands might have a massive budget, some don't. Sometimes I don't actually think budget comes into it. I think it's more a case of they really, really want to make a splash in that space, for example. And I think ultimately some of the bigger brands, the more established companies that have been around for decades, hundreds of years, have built massive, massive success on that kind of rigid brand guideline. It kind of can have a bit of a, well, if it's not broken, like we don't need to fix it mentality. But often you see that the way that innovation shakes up different industries. So whether it's like Monzo as a challenger bank's a really good example of, you know, for decades you think, well, how can anyone compete with the high street bank? It's just an institution almost more than a brand. And then you see like challenger banks like Monzo and Starling come in and completely tear up the way that it's done. And actually that was mainly because they weren't serving, I guess, bankers. They were serving the customers and the customer needs. Customers wanted to be able to have an amazing app that had a really good interface, but also really good customer service. They wanted to be able to customize the way that they save and spend. And brands like Monzo kind of came in and harnessed that opportunity and ran with it and sort of ladded into what consumers really want instead of, I guess, thinking too much about kind of the brand guidelines, which obviously is a lot easier when you are fresh. But I think, like you said, it does inhibit a lot of like brands of long standing, really, just because there is that trepidation to do it.
Yeah, 100%. And it does make sense. And I think that, you know, it's not necessarily something that's going to change overnight. And for a brand to, you know, let go of a bit of that, I'm sure it's hard. It's seeing proof and stuff, isn't it? And, you know, knowing it works. But in your opinion then, in terms of like digital PR and kind of brand awareness and stuff, what's your opinion on like the importance of storytelling for brands and, you know, really creating stories around themselves and what they do?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely integral. I think it kind of seems obvious to say like, oh, well, of course it's about creating a buzz, creating a story, creating attention around your brand, which is going to have benefit in terms of awareness. But obviously PR comes under the discipline of like earned media. And I think a lot of the time we forget that media has to be earned. So if we are working with a brand who just want to push, oh, we've launched this product, we've launched this service, and the headline you're hoping to achieve with something is literally X brand has done this.
Yeah.
It's very, okay. If it's a massive innovative product launch, then it probably will receive some attention, receive some coverage. But journalists are storytellers as well, and we want a narrative. We want to know why that's going to resonate with the public and their readership and stuff like that. And there's so many more creative ways in which, if a brand is launching a new product, for example, how can we craft a narrative around that fits in with what's going on right now, which fits in with consumer demands, which fits in with like the psyche of the country at the moment. And there's just so many ways in which you can do it that appeals to specific audiences. And I think being able to get under the skin of the brand and understand those challenges, it kind of allows you to be able to put a better story together. And also it just makes it easier. I think the best digital PR and general PR campaigns I've ever seen always kind of have that story first, and you're reading them and you think, oh, actually they're also promoting this, or it gives me a reason to buy whatever they want to sell, rather than just a brand has released this and it's kind of a hope that it might appeal to me as a reader. It's like, oh, well, I'd never even heard of them. I'd never even heard of this product. But after this piece, after this campaign, I feel compelled to explore them more. I feel compelled to explore this product or service. So it kind of resonates a lot deeper, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And then if they have also released XYZ product, then it's like that's part of it, but it's not what they're leading with. Because I think you're definitely right. That is what the traditional kind of perception of PR, you know, mostly to people who don't work in PR or marketing, is that thing of like, land me a press release to say that we've just launched this new product, or we've just secured this like deal, or we've just whatever. And it's like, and it's that thing of, it's almost trying to explain, isn't it, that I know that that's important to you, but like look at the context of what we're competing with and like what else is going on in the world, what else is going on in the media, and is this going to land anywhere? Can we fit it in, like you say, to other stuff that's going on? Because we've got much higher chance of getting, you know, success if we're able to link it into something else contextual and like actually be able to put ourselves in the picture.
Like it's about like leveraging your brand at the right points as well. I think a really good example is, I guess it's not really PR, obviously, because it is in a way, but like the John Lewis Christmas ads, obviously they're huge, they're expected, people anticipate them, they're like an institution in themselves. And so many people online will be like, oh, well, you know, I love the John Lewis ad, but I don't buy John Lewis, or this recent one hasn't made me want to go out and buy a skateboard from John Lewis or whatever after watching the TV ad. And it's like, that's not necessarily the purpose. That people associate those sort of positive affirmations with John Lewis as the brand. People know it as like a recognizable name. It's a consideration for people who have a vested interest in something that John Lewis want to buy. And it's kind of that, I guess, that understanding that kind of like softer side of it and the brand side of it. Obviously, if it's a digital focused campaign, it can have a massive impact on like search, organic performance, all that kind of stuff. But it is about thinking, okay, well, you might not immediately think, oh, I'm going to do my Christmas shopping at John Lewis, but there probably will be a point in the next 6 months where you might need something. And John Lewis is the first brand that comes to mind because of the really good work they do about maintaining that brand awareness.
Yeah.
And I remember in COVID as well, what was really interesting was obviously shops were shut. You couldn't go out and shop on the high street. So there was a massive kind of, oh, well, what's going to happen? Obviously, the marketing industry, clients were pulling budget. There was loads of pauses. But ultimately, digital PR as a service grew exponentially over COVID because brands realized that, okay, we can't actively sell to customers. It's not as if we can put money behind, paid advertisements to try and entice them to buy something or go into store. But what we can do is make sure that when the shops reopen, when things hopefully get back to normal, our brand is the forefront of this person's mind. If they're looking to buy jewelry or fashion or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So that kind of storytelling and that kind of, I guess, like softer brand activity actually can resonate, I think, over a longer period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can imagine it can be a harder sell, can't it? Because it's it doesn't necessarily always have those completely tangible, metrics or, performance indicators that can say, actually, yes, this brand awareness piece has resulted in X, Y, Z. But like you say, that's not necessarily always what the motivation is. And it's kind of having that balance of stuff that is going to lead to those things, but then is also going to be sort of, like you say, putting it at the forefront of people's minds, that positive impression that you associate with the brand. And, I think it's definitely difficult. Kind of moving on slightly from your work that you've done, like agency side and stuff like that. Like we mentioned before, you are the founder of Flaming Crap.
Yes.
And I would be really interested to know from your perspective, how have you found kind of building a business yourself, like the PR and like e-commerce side of that? Because it's obviously quite different to what you do for other brands and stuff like that. How's that been?
It's really fun. It's really, really fun because there's so much freedom with it. But it's also so difficult because I'd like to think I'm quite good at PR. I do it with my fiance. His background is like recruitment and stuff like that. So we're at half of it's just being completely winging it. But I think what's been really interesting is that I think there's kind of a pressure to make sure that every piece of marketing absolutely lands. If we're doing some PR for it, it absolutely lands. And we've been really fortunate that a lot of the campaigns we've done for it have done really well, and a lot of the concepts and a lot of the candles that we sell have sold really well. But I think what's really interesting is being able to critique what we've done as well. So when we first launched, the kind of premise of it is that we sell really unusually scented candles and it's all homemade. My fiance literally does it in our basement. But what was really interesting is that those kind of initial campaigns that we launched, so like the 2020 scent, for example, did really, really well because they were just really unusually scented. That was the story. It was a candle that was meant to smell like 2020.
Yeah.
And then I think in digital PR, there's a lot of formats that are rinsed and repeated. So anyone that works in digital PR will know the dream job format, which you see time and time again. And they still work, but I'd say to a less degree, just because people are kind of recognizing the patterns. And it's the same with stuff like this. We could launch a candle that smells like an unusual scent tomorrow, and the results compared to what they were a year ago or 2 years ago are massively diminished. And I think what we've learned is that especially this year, we've moved from, I guess, kind of our own lines of candles to doing a lot of work with other brands. So we did work with a really good agency called Scoop, and also with Skiddle earlier in the year to create a festival scented candle for festival season, which was really, really funny. It smelled like stale beer and burgers.
I was going to say, what would that smell like? Because I can imagine it could be really lovely, but also could be the dingier side of festival life.
I think before it was a burger van, stale beer, freshly cut grass, and portaloos.
Okay.
So the portaloo one, I remember my fiance was just desperately trying to figure out. I think it was a mixture of a bleachy kind of smell, lemon. It's horrible.
I was going to say, what were the sales for that?
It was.
I mean,
it was. So we obviously handed it over to Skiddle, and then the proceeds went to charity.
Okay.
Which was really, really nice. But it's also been so interesting to kind of go from. Usually it's me that's kind of thinking of the PR idea of it. Obviously that was working in conjunction with another agency. To just, I guess, being the supplier of it, but also watching how those campaigns fare in the media and how well they get picked up and stuff like that. And it's kind of, we're at the point where we're looking ahead to next year and thinking, okay, well, we want to introduce a new range, but actually what we've done for the past 2 years, I feel like the industry's moved on from that. Like that kind of shock factor that we kind of used to play on when we launched has diminished slightly. Like it's not as interesting. So how do we innovate? How do we change it? So it is interesting because I think there's that pressure to constantly feel like you're on the cusp of what's going on in that particular industry.
Yeah.
But it's exciting as well because the only person I sort of have to answer to with it is me and my partner.
Yeah,
So,
and that must be so refreshing, like you
Yeah.
said. It's just, and it's another way as well for you to test things that maybe you don't necessarily always get the opportunity to do in your full-time role, and just do little bits of other things, learn. It's like it's like anything, isn't it? Marketers who freelance, or do other things. It's having the opportunity to like do other bits. But I've got to ask, because I feel like people listening will be thinking, what did the 2020 candle smell like? What was the vibe?
So it was the concept. It was like every layer was meant to like reminisce you through the year 2020. So
I love that.
One was hand sanitizer.
Okay.
One was banana bread because that's what everyone had been
Yeah.
baking. One was
my
like
God.
a wood smell for like the DIY projects that everyone had been doing.
Yes.
And then the last one was a mixture of like sweat and cheap aftershave, which was meant to be Joe Exotic from Tiger King.
Oh,
because
my
like it seems a million years ago
God.
now when you talk about
I
Tiger
forgot he
King.
existed.
Exactly.
That is a throwback. I love that.
But that was it, and it did really well because like I've sort of spoken about this before, but when I say it was zero budget, like it was literally a can, a label stuck onto it, photos I shot on a phone against like a sheet of A3. But it was a story. It was like, this is a candle you can buy. It's meant to basically just like take the piss out of what had been a crap year for everybody. And it did really well here, but especially in America because we seeded it out. It was during the 2020 election. So there was a lot of like heavy news at the time, and it was kind of, like when it was on TV, it was kind of obviously a lot of like the political reporting, but then like the light, funny story at the end.
Yeah.
So it did really well, to be fair.
That
I'm really proud of it.
sounds amazing.
But-
Yeah, I had to ask. I was so intrigued. I don't think I could have gone to sleep tonight not knowing what it smelled of. So moving on a little bit, obviously we've talked quite a bit about your career in digital PR, but as you've been in the industry for quite a while now, your role's evolved and you're quite familiar with managing people in a team. It's not necessarily a skill that everybody has, and it's something that, on top of your day-to-day role in digital PR, it's a whole new kettle of fish. What would you say is your management style, and like how has that developed through time?
I think it's developed primarily in kind of thinking how I wanted to be managed or how I wish I was managed at like different points in my career. Not that like I've had some fantastic managers over the years, but it's more like one of my favorite parts of the job is like development and upskilling the team and training. And I kind of think that like you never stop learning ever. So like we were on about how digital PR changes so much. Like it's really naive to think, oh, well, we had a new exec join the team and we did like a month of really solid onboarding training to get them to grips with everything that we do, and that kind of should be the end of it. So for me, like being able to really get to know someone as a person, but get to know the bits of the job that they enjoy, the bits of the job that they absolutely can't stand, the bits that they might have a personal passion about, or they really want to explore an area that might not necessarily be in the job description that we hired them for. But if there's an opportunity, and luckily, obviously, within an agency, we work with creative teams and dev teams and all sorts of, there's all sorts of overlap. So I want to make sure that they feel like they're getting a really well-rounded experience in their career. Because if I'm managing someone that, is great at PR, but they have a massive passion for, I don't know, like art or something, and they spend loads of time with the creative teams, and they're coming to me and the team with, oh, well, there's this execution we could do for a campaign that kind of plays on those strengths. And then eventually they come and say, oh, I've been offered a job and it's in a creative agency and I'm going to go and be part of the design team, but it's something that I'm so passionate about. I'm like, do you know what? Fair play. Like, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think it's just like, we all want to be happy at work. Like we spend so much of our time doing our job. And I feel really lucky because I genuinely, it's probably a bit sad, but I like genuinely really love what I do and it really excites me every day.
Yeah, no, that's not sad. That's exactly what you want.
So I feel like I just want to make sure that anyone that is in my team feels like that.
Yeah.
Like I love asking people like what parts of the job you hate, because so many people will be like, oh no, like I love it all. It's all amazing. I'm like, no, that's not a trick question. Like if there's like I hate loads of like if someone says to me what part of the job you hate, it's like it's making PowerPoint presentations. Like if you say to me like, Alex, can you make this deck look really pretty? I'm just like,
no,
like,
I can't.
No, I hate it. But it's like someone might love doing stuff, and it's like once you've got a team, I think understanding that really well means that you can give tasks to people that love doing them, and ultimately as a collective become stronger and just hopefully be a bit more harmonious, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with what you said about kind of wanting to be a manager that you would have wanted, or you had, taken inspiration from people who did manage you, who, were great, or, maybe roles when you had a manager who or didn't have much of a manager, or it wasn't ideal. And I think that that's definitely a really good inspiration for maybe people who are going into leadership roles, management roles, is like do the things that you would want. But I also totally agree with you. I love to have the opportunity to give people in our team like chances to do different things, maybe be exposed to stuff that they've not done before, and sit in on things and like just basically kind of give them those opportunities, because really you don't want to hold people against their will. You don't want people, like you said, if someone finds that they love something in the creative team and then they eventually go off and get a creative job, you've done your job because they're happy.
Them realise that.
Exactly. You don't want to hold someone in a job that, it's great for you because they're doing something that works for you, but actually they don't want to be there. Like what's the point?
Yeah, exactly.
So on a similar vein then, for myself as a manager, and a lot of our listeners will be managers and stuff as well, how do you kind of keep your team motivated? I know that you've already touched on the fact that you want to give them opportunities to like get involved in different things, but do you have any particular stuff that you find really works well with your team?
I think again it kind of like boils down to those like understanding their passion points. I think everyone has a different management style, and some people will be really critical of, trying to be too pally with people that you manage, or being too formal, being too cold. And I think if you can just find the sweet spot of where there's like that mutual respect, but also anyone that you manage knows that you're there to just help them and to assist them. I think a big part in terms of motivating the team is sometimes like trial by error. So I think one thing that I've noticed, and a lot of other people probably will know as well, is that I guess the more you go into sort of a management role, the less of the day-to-day of like PR you do. So like a couple of years ago when I was just like solely looking after accounts, like I was thinking of PR campaign ideas day in, day out, whereas now that's like more my team's job. And I think it's really tempting for me to go, oh, I've had this idea, like, let's just do this. Let's go with this because I think it'll work. When actually, no, like you're going to get the best out of somebody if if they want your advice and you can help steer them and help guide them if you really think that there's a certain direction you should go. But you need to let them feel like they've got that agency. Otherwise, they're never going to have that confidence. And I think having confidence in their own ability is something that's really difficult to teach. You can work with people and you think, God, they're amazing. And they will never think that about themselves. But I think a lot of that stems from how they've been managed and how they've been given feedback and stuff like that. So I think if someone comes to me like, Alex, I've got this amazing idea for a campaign, I think it's really, really going to work, and they can give me a rationale as to why they think it will, I'd be like, cool, like I'll help you steer it all the way. I back you, let's run with it. If it doesn't work, okay, there's probably a sticky conversation we might need to have with a client. But again, it's part of a learning process. Like that first sticky conversation you might have with a client is never nice, but the more you do it, like it's going to happen, and it will inevitably happen again. So I think it's just about believing in people. And I guess it stems from, you hope that you've hired them for because of those skills in the first place. But just basically allowing them to have that confidence, because if that idea pays off and does really well, that confidence will then see them take on more responsibility and more ownership and be able to think more creatively and more innovatively. And ultimately, as a manager, that makes your job easier because you can be left to just manage instead of having to do the elements of the job, I guess, that kind of the other team are now responsible for. Yeah,
and it's not an easy transition to make, is it? And I mean, I think a lot of people listening will relate to that, because you get into something because you're so passionate about it and you love it. And then it's like you want to progress, you want your career to move on, you want to earn more money, get to do kind of more higher level stuff. But that does come with letting go of some of the reins of the stuff that the nitty gritty of what you like. And so it is a tough balance of actually being able to take that step back and trust the people that you're working with. But you're right, like ultimately you're going to get the best out of them if you say, yeah, come to me if you need some advice. I'm here to help advise. Like, I've done this before. That's the reason I'm in the job I'm in. But equally, I trust you to do and make the right decisions, and I'll support you if they're right. If not, we'll rethink. But it's definitely not something that all managers can do. And I think that's when the micromanagement side of things comes in, doesn't it? Because it's like you can't let go of the doing. And it's like, ultimately, I don't know how you can be a manager and do the doing and the managing and everything else all together. It's just impossible.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's the thing. It's that I think if you're a manager and you are finding yourself in that situation, it's about taking that step back and thinking, okay, there's obviously like a knowledge gap here, or there's something that means that this task isn't, like, we can't do it effectively. But is that because you've not provided like adequate training? Is it not being explained in the right way? Does this person truly understand like what we need to achieve with this campaign, for example? And I think, so you can kind of consider that, but also it is that kind of letting go aspect. But I think, to be fair, I think in our industry, it's a shame, because I think if people don't want to go in like down a people management route, which not everybody does, it's often quite hard, especially in like agency structure, to progress, because it just naturally, you get a promotion, it means you manage someone and then you might manage a team. But there are roles, for example, where you just do become more senior but stay in that kind of like on the ground creative role. But ultimately, I think being able to equip and get your team to a point where they can execute stuff that's probably better than you ever were able to do. Like, for me, that's like some of the like proudest moments in my career, is like people I've worked with and managed at previous agencies that came in as an intern fresh from uni. And now I see them like as managers themselves, like running their own campaigns in different agencies and businesses and stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's so nice to see.
So rewarding.
Yeah.
And again, as a manager, I'm sure that you're very familiar with kind of managing different types of people, having to adapt your management style slightly to make sure that you're inclusive of kind of everyone's needs and stuff like that. And I know that that's something that is kind of something that you're personally passionate about as well. I mentioned earlier at the start of the podcast that you actually run your own podcast, Where's the Bride? And obviously, that's something that obviously is a super important passion to you. How would you maybe suggest that for any managers listening, they can kind of strive to be more inclusive in the workplace and make sure that they're conscious of those sorts of things?
I think it's one of those big questions that often I feel like we give like really generic answers to.
Yeah.
I think in terms of like hiring an inclusive and a diverse team, I think it's really important to understand that you might think you have a really good idea of how to do something, that you might already work with people that you think are fantastic at their job, but often you can hire someone and everyone from no matter what background they're from will have a different perspective. And I think especially in the creative industry and especially in marketing PR, that different perspective is usually the gold dust that can be missing from something.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the years of experience. It's not necessarily what university they went from or anything like that. It's literally that different, fresh perspective that somebody brings. And I think once you've onboarded, hopefully like quite a diverse team, if you are a manager, what's really important is to really just get to grips, sort of like I was saying with like getting to grips about what make people tick and like their passion points, but also how they prefer to work. So training's a really good example. I think it's so easy to put together a 50-page slide deck on here's how you do digital PR.
Yeah.
And some people will love that, and they will like listen really attentively and they will absorb it all and they will take it all in and they'll go away and be able to process it. So I'm one of these, the latter. Like if you just drone on at me on a 50 page PowerPoint, I'm gonna I have quite like a erratic brain, and I'm just not gonna pay attention. But then if you sit with me in person and take me through something with like examples, or if you just chuck me into something and say, come up with these ideas, it might not work right in the first place, but I learn really well through that kind of process.
Yeah.
So I think it's really early on being able to instill that confidence in your team to be able to come to you and say, Alex, that way you've explained that, it doesn't really work for me. Like if you can show me in this way, I might get it better. Or if I can, have a task to go away and do and come back and get written feedback or something, then that works better for me. So I think it's just about having the time and making the time to be able to kind of adapt your approach. I think time it comes into it. I think it's really easy to do a one size fits all and think we're doing a really good job because one person might have been really receptive to that training or that way of working, when actually everyone's different. Everyone has a different perspective. Everyone's going to learn differently. So as a manager, I feel like you should be carving out time to make sure that people learning the best way they can, because ultimately it will save you time in the long run.
And I like the way that you phrased that, because at first you said having time, but actually then you said it's making time, because it's realistically, if you said to someone, any manager, do you have time to, adapt the way that you train your staff or the way that you convey what needs doing or whatever, they're probably going to say, no, I have this finite amount of time and doing this is just one task and I'll take it off. But actually, if you change it into making time, then it's something that you can choose to do with your time, isn't it? It's actually how much of a priority is it? And obviously, we think that it is quite a priority. And then kind of on the flip side then, what would you say are some of the ways that people can be more inclusive and kind of, advocates in the workplace from a non-management perspective, so not as a leader? Do you have any kind of advice for our listeners around that sort of thing?
I guess like drawing on my own experience from doing like my podcast, which is about basically it's like a wedding planning podcast about for the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, I love that.
But I think what's really important is that if you are working in a team or a company or whatever, and you are looking around and thinking there's a lot of similar faces and a lot of similar backgrounds and a lot of similar, I guess, like views on the way of life, then there's probably a problem. And I think the first step is recognizing that you might actually work in a business that is 50% women. And you think, oh, that's amazing. We have a really good gender gap, for example, as in it's completely equal. But how many of those men and women are white? How many of those men and women are identify as straight? How many come from like a high socioeconomic background? And I think it's about being able to feel comfortable to have those difficult conversations. If you're noticing those things where you work, then surely there's someone, whether it's in HR, whether it's your own manager, it's another colleague, all it takes is someone to go, actually, we want to be able to do something about this, and we want to make this place either more attractive, or we want to be more proactive in making sure that we are a diverse and inclusive employer. And ultimately, it's about, I guess, being the step in that change. And I think if you are someone that, I guess, isn't a minority, for example, it's about being proactive. It shouldn't be someone who comes from a minority background. It shouldn't be their job, I guess, to come into an organisation and educate on race or sexuality or privilege. It should be about those proactive strides and what we can be doing from our positions already to basically make sure that we are in a position where we can increase our diversity and inclusion in the workplace, basically.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's one of those things, isn't it, where it's sort of like, it's not an easy thing to do necessarily, and it can feel very uncomfortable. It can feel like a real challenge. It can feel like you're really doing something kind of outside of your role and what people would expect of you. But equally, it's going to go one of two ways. It's going to be well received, or it's really not. And then if it's not really well received, it's probably told you something about the place you work, and it's kind of made a bit of a decision for you as to like, is this actually somewhere I want to be? And then that's your decision to make, isn't it? But it's only really going to go one of two ways. So if you're in a position to be able to speak up on those sorts of things, like, I absolutely agree. It's something that we should all be doing more of. It's been so lovely to chat to you, Alex. One final question before we finish, because we've kind of got to circle back to PR before we go. If you could choose a standout digital PR campaign, whether it's one that you've worked on or just one that you've kind of seen and absolutely loved in the past couple of years, what would you say that is, and any reasons why?
This is going to sound really vain, because I'm going to choose one that I worked on.
I was hoping you would.
I have to say the Flaming Crap 2020 scent candle, just because it was a tester to see if the power of storytelling on its own can basically sell products. So like I've mentioned before, it was done with no budget. There was no big team behind it. There was no agency. There was no sort of in-house capability. It was literally, can we craft a story that's going to sell a candle? And it did, and it did really well. But it also kind of demonstrated that when you are, say, working in-house or working in an agency, that power of the narrative and power of the storytelling targeted at the right publications and the right journalists can actually have a huge return on investment, which again kind of led us back to the stuff I was saying about how brands could do with being a bit more daring and breaking out of that brand bubble a little more.
No, I think that's an amazing example because, like you say, it's that thing of breaking out of the brand bubble. It's doing something different. It's doing things on a very, very tight budget and still seeing all that success. It shows that what you're saying about breaking out of the brand bubble, like, is something that brands should be doing more of. So yeah, I think it's an amazing example, and I was hoping that you were going to draw on one of your own experiences, I'll be honest. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of the Girls in Marketing podcast. We love hearing from you, so if you enjoyed this episode, leave us a review to let us know your thoughts, and make sure you hit the subscribe or follow button to be the first to hear when our new episodes released. Don't forget, if you want to get involved with Girls in Marketing, check out our membership to join our incredible community of marketers. Think marketing resources, courses, webinars, and more. Find out more on our website or drop us a message on any of our social channels @Girls in Marketing.